I am one of the 40,000 people who backed the Cosmere RPG Kickstarter, even though I think the project is doomed. Welcome to Reading Crossbow. My name is Rob, and this is a show that's normally about sci-fi and fantasy novels, and sometimes, like today, a little bit more. Now, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the Cosmere RPG Kickstarter that just wrapped up. So as of the time of this recording, the Kickstarter is almost complete. It's raised $11 million and has some 40,000 different backers. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is we recently read Mistborn on this show and did our review. And on our Discord, Lena brought up that this Kickstarter was happening and was debating on whether or not she was going to back it. Now, she's not really a role-playing game player, though I think she's played. I'm much more on the RPG side of things as far as the two of us goes. And so I mentioned on the Discord, I was like, oh, don't worry, I'm going to back it.
But I think it's doomed.
So that's why we're here. You might ask, if I don't think it's going to succeed, why did I back it? I mean, obviously the Kickstarter is going to fund. It blew past its initial required funds, 2 weeks back. If I think it's going to fail, why would I back it? Well, I don't want it to fail. Let's make that clear. I want it to succeed. But I think there's a lot of red flags on this project that make me very fearful of its future. So a little bit of my background. Just on Kickstarter, I've backed dozens of RPG and miniature projects over the last decade or so. Some of those games went amazing, like Deadlands. Some of them technically delivered what they were supposed to, like 7th Sea. And some of them absolutely, completely failed, like the game Satanic Panic. And over these years, I've kind of picked up on some patterns of the way these projects tend to go. And not just for projects that I backed on Kickstarter, but even others that I've experienced as well, just maybe even from more mainstream publishers. If you look behind me back there, there's lots of different RPGs back there. There's including a lot of licensed RPGs. For example, I have Dresden Files, Judge Dredd, Supernatural, Smallville, Leverage, several different editions of Star Wars, Warhammer, Legend of the Five Rings, as a license, not the original RPG. Marvel, Star Trek, Stargate, Men in Black, Conan, and there's even other ones that I wanted to buy and I didn't get a chance, like the Doctor Who and Game of Thrones RPGs. There's even over here some licensed D&D worlds, such as the 3rd edition of Dragonlance and Ravenloft campaign settings, which were licensed out to third parties to actually publish. So I have quite a bit of experience with a variety of RPGs, and especially the licensed ones. So why do I think it's going to fail? Well, there's no single reason. It's just a sum of a variety of reasons. And you may disagree with some of my thoughts that I'm going to discuss here, but let's get into it. Now, this is probably the first and most important reason why I think this product is doomed. And it's because it's a licensed product. The intellectual property, the IP of Cosmere, and the IP of the game are separate and owned by different companies. This is why these new games that this Kickstarter is launching are not expanding upon the previous Mistborn RPG. Instead, it's kind of just starting over. And that's because even when the setting license reverts back to Brandon Sanderson, the game doesn't go with it. The game mechanics is still owned by the licensor. So the way these kinds of licenses work is the licensee needs to make as much money as possible while they hold the license. Sure, there'll be some contract language about how they can extend out the license, but eventually it's going to revert back. And at that point, the game is over. It's done. And at that point, that is a doom of this game. Doesn't have to be in the near future. So for example, the Dragonlance and Ravenloft books that I mentioned earlier, they were published over years and published dozens of books and for them as licensed products. And therefore, were very successful as far as I'm concerned. Even the Star Wars, like Star Wars Saga Edition, was an amazingly well executed role-playing game that was published over many years, delivering a lot of very great product to consumers. Now, the reason why I think those succeeded so very well is those examples all had very much a long view on their license. They set up a plan. We're going to release a book every X number of months, and we're going to just reliably put out good product after good product. Our success and terrific support of this game will sell those later books. What I found, on the other hand, with licensed products who don't have this kind of long view is they do a giant release and maybe with years in between, if ever, for multiple releases. For the most part, most of these games are just a one and done. They pop out some books, whether it's via Kickstarter or just a one-time push of product, and then they're over. And that's the last time you hear from the license company until the license reverts back. And so that comes to my second reason why I think this project is going to fail. And that's just within this Kickstarter, it's actually two separate but related games. There's the Stormlight Archive role-playing game, and there's the Mistborn role-playing game. And each of these two have very separate release dates. Well, that seems kind of weird and very strongly against what I mentioned above for successful licensed IPs. So why would they put two completely separate but related products in a single Kickstarter? Well, for simple reasons, money. Personally, I feel like if the developer genuinely believed in this product, they would have stuck with the Stormlight Archive RPG that they had previously announced and mentioned during this Kickstarter that the actual game was going to be called the Cosmere role-playing game, because not only did we license Stormlight Archive, but we licensed the entire Cosmere and look forward to the upcoming releases of future Cosmere RPG books. So once this first Kickstarter actually got published out to the backers, you could put out a second Kickstarter for the Mistborn role-playing game, and even have the Stormlight game as an extra for the Mistborn Kickstarter, and maybe even reach an even bigger audience. And then you could hint at, oh, there's even other worlds, and we're going to start dropping some more books for those as well. Separate Kickstarters which show that they have a plan for long-term support and expansion of this. Separate Kickstarters would also show that they have a confidence that the delivery of this first Kickstarter would fuel an even more successful follow-up. In fact, some of the best Kickstarters I've really ever experienced were the ones who delivered a great product Kickstarter after Kickstarter, such as almost anything by Shane Hensley with Deadlands and Savage Worlds. Think of like the Reaper Bones minis or the Gloomhaven board games. By building upon multiple Kickstarters over time, you just build a solid and trusted audience. But instead, we're going to get one Kickstarter with multiple delivery waves dropping products over a series of years. Basically, it's get the bag while you can, because this might be the only chance these guys are getting paid. So that's the Kickstarter itself that I have a lot that's throwing up some red flags for me. But what about the backers? This argument, I think, is maybe based on a pretty limited sample. So take these observations with a kind of grain of salt. So when I looked around online, such as places like RPGNet, Reddit, what I found was that it's the readers of the novels who are the most excited about this. Whereas like on gaming-centric locations, the audience seems a lot more reserved and skeptical. Lena mentioned in a past episode that about there's a kind of consumer of novels who like to buy the novels just so they can have a good-looking library, despite the fact they may not even open that book. And that's what I fear about what I'm seeing here, is that I'm afraid, and this is, once again, based on a very limited sample, that the majority of the people who are backing this Kickstarter are not role-playing gamers. They're people like Lena, who are far more just a fan of the novels, and less so people like me who are much more role-playing game players than they are novel readers. You can be both, but if you're far more on the gaming side of things, I think that would actually be far more beneficial to this project than if the majority of people are simply fans of the novels. And I'm very much afraid that if the gamers are the minority of these backers, then there won't be much for sales after this Kickstarter is over, which will only just speed up the end of the license. So for me, I think maybe my biggest red flag is actually the price. I mentioned earlier there's some $11 million from 40,000 backers, roughly, and which comes out to be almost $300 per backer. Now, looking at the actual tiers, you can see that, over 25,000 people bought into the $300 and $400 tiers, and others might even be up there with just a bunch of extras. Now, I'm not here to talk about the price of RPG books. Now, honestly, $60 for an RPG book isn't a crazy price in today's world, nor is full price PDFs outside of the norm, unfortunately. No, I'm talking about the sunk investment of these thousands of backers. So some people, morons, still don't understand that Kickstarter is supposed to be a risky venture. They still see this as just pre-orders for guaranteed product deliveries. These kind of people can't handle delays. They can't handle missed overpromises. So for example, there was a failed Kickstarter from a few years back called For Robotech. Similar to this one, the average backer paid $200 to $300 in their initial investment to this project. And yes, I understand being mad when that project collapsed and it was clear that your money was lost. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the people who became incredibly unhinged way before that project really started to fail. They went full tilt well before the writing was on the wall. Arguably, didn't incentivize that developer to work any harder or try any harder to get that project done. And once floodgates of refunds, or at least the demand for refunds starts, the project's screwed. And not just because if they refund people, they may not be able to afford to actually deliver to the people who didn't get refunded, but more so, if they get a lot of refund requests, even if they don't pay them out, that's going to severely impact the project's enthusiasm and willingness to maybe go beyond and maybe take a loss in order to deliver something. So I also remember another failed Kickstarter for a game called Satanic Panic. Now, I'm not going to question. The developer definitely is ultimately responsible for failing to deliver at least something. However, unhinged backers harassed, threatened the developer, driving him off the internet. Yeah, that didn't exactly help get the product delivered. And then when the developer kind of peeked back into the project like 3 years later, was like, "Hey, I think I'm going to keep working on this, but don't talk to me." Immediately, boom, claws out, attack again, relentlessly, until poof, like a fart in the wind, the developer is gone. Everyone who backed this now lost. Because I think for some people, failure is preferable to even a partial success. If they don't get 100%, they want nothing so that they can happily complain about it for the rest of time. All right, so TLDR. At this price, $300 on average per backer, big money backers become entitled assholes. And they will destroy any enthusiasm the project team has for this. And here's the problem. This project has tens of thousands of big money backers. There's going to be at least a couple assholes in there. So I haven't actually talked about the game because I'm not sure it matters. But let's talk about it a little bit. It looks like it's leaning heavily into the D20 5th edition game mechanic. Just kind of a mixed bag. I get it. It's well known. It's easy to learn and explain. But on the other hand, a game that's more Fate-like, like the previous Mistborn game, in a way is a lot more inspiring. I'm not sure if another D20 5th edition style game is going to merit like a strong cult following that you're going to need to really be a successful third-party RPG. Almost all the successful and memorable third-party games over the last decade brought something special to the table. Often it was a cool mechanic that just got the juices flowing. And I'm not sure I see it here. None of this has to do with the real quality of the game. And I don't know if the setting itself is enough to be a long-time draw for a series of books. Finally, I'm not confident mechanically on how you really balance the idea of, for example, Mistborn, a Mistling, and a normal Ska all being in the same team or party. I don't necessarily need it to be DPS balanced, but it should be fun balanced, because every archetype needs to feel useful and valuable without diverting from the actual setting too much. Lots of games have tried this out, like the Dresden Files and the different Star Wars games have each made an attempt to balance out very powerful and very mundane people being part of the same group with different levels of success. But I'm afraid if that doesn't land right, both in the setting sense and the game sense, it's going to be real tough for this game to win for both the fans of the books and the fans of role-playing games. And if you don't get both on board, it's going to be a tough sell. And finally, let's talk about the developer. The developer looking at them, this is their 12th Kickstarter project, which is awesome. I mean, terrific. But if you look at their past projects, this project specifically is quite a bit unique. The majority of all the past projects were board games, and the combined revenue of all of those other 11 Kickstarters is less than this one, which raises some concerns, but it's not unachievable, but it's concerning. Now, I don't know this team, so I can't really judge if they're the right team for this project. It sure would be nice if there was like a Shane Hensley on the project, or just so you knew, like, oh, this guy, he delivers. And I don't know. I'm just not seeing it, but I don't know, and so I'm not really going to judge them. But I am concerned a little bit about the size of the team. I mean, just from the headshots, this is a pretty big team. And this is a big team that's going for a minimum of 2 years. And big teams cost a lot of money. And any delays to this project is going to cost a whole lot more. This project's going to get pretty expensive. And with that big of a team, I'm concerned that they're going to spend this money too quickly. Also, what I don't see on that list is Brandon Sanderson. I mean, heck, 2 of the 6 core books of this are basically just setting books. I mean, they're encyclopedias for those worlds. I would have actually loved if they would actually even hire him back and say, hey, dude, you can drop some crazy word count in a given year. Can you write us up some encyclopedias for these settings? Sure, they can maybe go back and tweak them and make them more game friendly, but I would have felt a lot more confident if he were actually taking a personal role in this project. All right, so what do I think will happen for this project and how it's going to fail? Well, first off, I think the project's going to get delayed. I mean, let's be honest. A 1-year timeline to deliver the first half of this is pretty ambitious. And unless they've already basically got it done, I would expect for this to get delayed at least some. I mean, and I'm not at all concerned that that's going to happen. But, I mean, honestly, they're going to spend a fair amount, a meaty chunk of time just doing the printing and fulfillment. So, starting deliveries a year from now, yeah, I honestly don't see it. I'm not worried about it if it gets delayed. However, I'm concerned about how some of these backers are going to handle this project getting delayed. And I think that'll largely spell how the rest of this project goes. You see, that first delay is going to make or break this. Because when they announce that, there will be people who will immediately start demanding refunds. There always is. And whether or not they even give refunds, the deliverables from that point forward are going to be worse. Because either they're going to have a smaller budget because they're starting to refund people, or the excitement for this project on that project team is going to start decreasing. Because they're seeing that people are becoming less and less excited and more hostile. I'm genuinely afraid that some unhinged asshole is going to come in and start threatening or doxing team members on the project, which might cause them to either quit or become a whole lot less enthusiastic, which personally I wouldn't blame them, but it's going to impact the output of this project. Let's assume the Starlight Archives RPG actually gets delivered. It has to be amazing, or the Mistborn books are screwed. Because, once again, if it's not amazing, entitled idiots are going to start demanding refunds again. and starting to go into their normal aggressive behavior. So either way, I'm very concerned that the Mistborn books, their quality is going to be significantly lower than the quality of the Stormlight archives, unless the Stormlight archive RPG books are just incredible on delivery, flawless delivery, which, I mean, honestly never happens. There's always like, issues that happen. Like on the current Gloomhaven second edition, half the comments on that project are like, "Oh, this didn't get included in my box, and I want a full refund because," and just anger. You got 90% of what you wanted. The other 10% will be fixed. Maybe not on the timeline you expected, or maybe not, it wasn't originally perfect, but it's going to get fixed. And yet, the backers go nuts. And then the game's over. I genuinely don't expect there to be much, if anything, after the initial Kickstarter is completed. If anything, there'll be maybe a kind of whimper in the dark adventure or two. Maybe an expansion gets announced but never really gets delivered. And why? Because it's a licensed project. If this team really genuinely had a long-term plan, they wouldn't have done this in one giant Kickstarter. Instead, they went for the cash grab to get as much money as they could to pay off the license fee and, fuel their payroll for the next year or two. I really do hope that we, and remember, I backed this project too, get these books. But I am pessimistic about it because of you. Yeah, you. The backers watching this project rage commenting because you or other backers like you are probably going to ruin this for all of us. I already mentioned all of the licensed RPGs that I own or have owned, and almost all of them were a single outing because the developer lost enthusiasm for a variety of reasons. They stopped producing and lost the license. The only hope of this game being successful in the long term is for it to get released in stores, and then for more sales to happen in those stores. Now, what do I mean by that? This Kickstarter is $10 million. That's a huge amount of money. No, what's going to make this successful and become a great licensed project is people need to play the game. I can't say that enough. People gotta play this game. You gotta when you get this in hand, you gotta play it with your group. And if it's fun, your group is gonna get excited and they're gonna want to go get their own, core manual for Stormlight Archive. And that's gonna feed those future sales. That starts a feedback loop, which will encourage and excite the developer to actually continue to produce good product. Unfortunately, that's what we might call in the community fans the best timeline. And I'm afraid we're already in the darkest timeline. So ultimately, to answer the question, if I think this is all doomed, why did I back the project? Well, for one, I'm totally going to lurk in the Kickstarter's comments and other bowels of the internet because these backers are going to be nuts. Honestly, I'm just going to roll in every few months with a bowl of popcorn. Yeah, I'm that guy. And just read up on all the insanity of my fellow backers. Also, most of the licensed game I've bought were just that. They were one-shot releases. And I didn't expect much from them either. What do I really want? I want a core game rulebook and some setting material so I can create a nice little sandbox to play in. Doesn't really matter to me if this project ends after the Kickstarter's over. Would I like it if it continued on and had even more life and expanded into more of these Cosmere settings? Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'm not going to hold my breath. And finally, just to make it clear, that Satanic Panic game I mentioned that completely failed to deliver, well, right after it funded, it released a rules pack, which was like, 10-page PDF with some extremely early playtest rules. And I ran a 5 or 6 session mini campaign, and it was a blast. Each session, the players fought a new RPG, group. One was like basically the Breakfast Club, which was this misfits doing Saturday detention at a school library that had rolled a die and went mad. And then the whole thing culminated with a giant battle royale with the Dark Lord of Denny's and his clan of Vampire the Masquerade LARPers, as the government team had to stop those vile role-playing gamers. Did I get what I actually paid for? No. And I never will, honestly. But if you take the price that I paid, divided by the number of man hours that me and my group played, it's a pretty good deal. It's probably like quarter an hour. So, to all my fellow backers, please focus on being a fan, not a consumer. The worst of us will ruin it for all of us. So anyway, I will follow up with this in a future video as either this project exceeds or, more than likely, fails to meet my already low expectations. So if you're interested in that, or interested in some sci-fi and fantasy novel reviews, please subscribe to the channel. It sure would help us a lot. And until next time, thank you.